Hello everyone and welcome to our third lesson in the evolution unit. Today we are going to be talking about the history of the theory of evolution and the key players involved in the development of the theory. So our first person and main person of interest in the development of the theory of evolution is Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin was a naturalist, and so this means he was kind of a jack of all trades in terms of science. He, studied rocks, studied plants, studied the animals, all kinds of things. And he sailed on a voyage on a ship called the HMS Beagle, and this voyage took him around the world. So from England, around South America, by the Galapagos Islands, you can see them right here, this small cluster of islands, and then, down around New Zealand, Australia, Africa, and then back up to England. So this voyage took him 5 years to complete. And along the way, there was lots of stops, and at each stop, he made the best of it. He made lots of observations about the plants, so the flora, the fauna, those are the animals, the geology, the rocks, the fossils, and the ecosystems of the region. And he collected a lot of samples from these places. So let's dive into some of Darwin's observations. So I pointed out the Galapagos Islands off the coast of South America. So this is a cluster of islands, and Darwin's ship made a lot of stops at these islands. And he was able to spend time making observations about the animals that were there, the rocks, all those kinds of things. So let's dive into some of his really important observations. So let's talk about finches. So a finch is a type of bird, and he noticed that on these islands there were these finches. However, when he went to different islands, each finch had a different beak, and he started to realize that, hey, that beak had something to do with the food that was available on the island. That, here you can see in my picture in the top left, on an island there was, finches with these sharp beaks, and the food that those birds ate was grubs. So this is kind of like a worm, like bugs. All right. And then here on a different island, there were finches that had these big beaks to, shear fruit that was available to them to eat. So starting to notice, hey, there's something going on there. This isn't just random. So he also made some observations about tortoises. So here's a picture of a Galapagos tortoise. And he noticed that on the different islands, their shells looked slightly different, that their necks and their legs, on some islands they were long, and on some islands they were short. So he realized that, hey, there's something going on there, and there's some relationship with the ecosystem, because the environment on each island is slightly different, and so are the tortoises. All right, another really interesting observation that he was able to make was, from fossils. So he found these fossils. Remember, a fossil is evidence of an extinct animal. So the bones, fossilized bones, tracks, or droppings, okay? It could be any of those things. And he found some fossils of Glyptodont. So you can see this kind of crazy looking creature here at the bottom of your screen. And he realized that this animal, which is extinct, looked like a gigantic armadillo. And so he realized there's some similarities between animals that are extinct and animals that are alive today. So he returned to England, was really able to take time to look at all of his specimens, his samples that he collected, look at his observations, and also make some more observations. So he noticed, that there's a lot of variation or variety in plants and animals due to artificial selection. So when we're talking about artificial selection, we're talking about humans specifically choosing traits that they want and then breeding for them, rather than just letting nature take its course. So for example, on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see we've got a wolf, and humans have domesticated wolves to dogs. And then taken that dog and selected for specific traits. Maybe that, there are working animals that have to, do specific jobs. So humans have chosen traits for those jobs. Like if you need a dog that's for hunting and you need it to be able to run fast and, catch prey that you've shot at, for example. Humans are able to breed for those specific traits and get a fast dog that's obedient. Okay, this isn't exclusive to animals. He also realized that, hey, humans are able to select for traits or pick certain things about plants and breed for them. So here we've got wild mustard in the bottom left of your screen. And from humans specifically breeding, for specific things in this plant, we've been able to get all of these other types of plants like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale. I'm not sure what this is, but, we've been able to get tons and tons of different types of plants from this wild plant by specifically choosing things that we want and breeding for them. All right, so Darwin did not come up with the theory of evolution by himself, or at least, alone and not listening to anyone else. There was a lot of other scientists at the time who were exploring, how does the world work? How did the world form? Trying to figure out the world. And so, Darwin, was influenced by these other scientists. He read their work, and that contributed to his thinking of evolution, or the theory of evolution. So the first person that we're going to talk about is Charles Lyell. And Charles Lyell came up with the idea of uniformitarianism. So this is the idea that, geologic processes that are happening right now, like earthquakes, erosion, landslides, things like that, okay? That these processes have been occurring at the same rate throughout Earth's history. So just like erosion is happening now outside, it was happening, thousands of years ago in the exact same way. So that's the idea of uniformitarianism. Okay, our next influential scientist was Georges Cuvier. So he came up with this idea of catastrophism. All right, and that's the idea that the Earth's surface, has been scarred by natural disasters, floods, tsunamis, volcanic events that cause things to go extinct, that it's possible for animals to go extinct. All right, our next scientist is James Hutton. James Hutton came up with the idea of gradualism. And this is the idea that these geologic forces, like erosion, volcanoes, things like that, they have shaped the way that Earth looks slowly over time, over millions of years. And so basically he's saying that it takes a long time for mountains to form or for valleys to form, and that the Earth must be millions of years old, not thousands of years old, like, the church thought and everyone really thought in that time, that it would take a lot longer for the Earth to look the way that it does. So that's James Hutton, the idea that Earth is actually really old, more like millions of years old, which was controversial at his time because everybody thought, no, the Earth is 6,000 years old. Like if you map out based on the Bible, like that's how old it is. So that was a little controversial for his time. All right, our next influential scientist was Alfred Russel Wallace. And Alfred Russel Wallace, he was a younger guy who lived at the same time as Darwin, when Darwin was older. And he came up with this idea that, hey, organisms can change over time. And they come from a common ancestor. They share ancestors from the past. And so he came up with this idea. And remember, he's a new guy on the block. He was young. And so he wanted to get some feedback from a mentor, from somebody who's a, respected scientist in the field. So he wrote to Darwin and said, hey, this is my idea, that organisms can evolve, that animals can change. And and organisms have a common ancestor that they share. And Darwin was like, uh-oh. Because when he came back from his, voyage on the Beagle, I told you he looked at all his specimens, he looked at all of his ideas, and then he did not share them. He, came up with a lot of the ideas of the theory of evolution, but didn't tell anyone because they were against what the church, proclaimed at the time, and he was afraid of getting, kicked out or shunned by society for these ideas. But, once Wallace, this young new scientist on the block, writes Darwin realizes, I need to publish my ideas about evolution, or someone else is going to get credit for them or think about them first. So he did publish his book, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But while we're on the track of talking about different scientists that influenced Darwin, we're going to talk about Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. So Lamarck came up with this theory of use and disuse. And remember, theories, they require a lot of evidence. So Jean-Baptiste Lamarck had evidence for this, or what he thought was evidence, but remember, theories can change. If evidence that is against that idea comes forward and it's creditable, it's been shown to be correct, then that theory will be changed or thrown out. And so we're going to talk about that kind of process happening here. So here's the theory. If a body part were used a lot during an individual's lifetime, then, it would be able to pass on that trait to its babies. But if that body part is not used, or, isn't developed during the individual's lifetime, then it will deteriorate and will not really be passed on to the babies. So here was the example organism that Lamarck thought, hey, this proves my theory, okay? So he looked at giraffes, and we know giraffes have really long necks, and he thought, hey, okay, these giraffes must stretch their neck over their lifetime. They stretch it and stretch it and stretch it. It gets longer and longer. And then when they have a baby, their baby is born with a little bit longer of a neck because they're able to pass on that trait to their baby. So, they didn't know about DNA back then. They didn't really know about, inheritance so much. And so Lamarck did get a couple things right here. Let's start with what he did get right. So he was the kind of first person to develop a theory that suggests that organisms are adapted to their environment, that they have specific traits like this long neck because their environment calls for that. Like, in order for the giraffe to survive, it has to be able to eat leaves that are on tall trees. So that was right. Like, that organisms adapt to their environment, okay? And this helped Darwin, start to connect those dots about those tortoises or those finches. But what he got wrong here is, he didn't really know exactly how inheritance worked. That, just because in my lifetime, let's say I'm a blacksmith, and I, am really strong because I'm hammering metal all day long, that doesn't mean that my baby is going to be born and be really muscular and automatically know how to be a blacksmith. That doesn't get passed on to my baby. They have to learn all that for themselves. So that's one thing he didn't quite get wrong, or didn't quite get right. And that also ties to the second bullet point there in the wrong category, that, the organism's behavior doesn't affect if it gets inherited or not. That my baby isn't going to know how to be a blacksmith or be muscular just because I was muscular during my life. Okay. So let's talk about the science of geology. So geology is a different discipline of science. Like biology is the study of rocks. Geology is the study of earth, the study of rocks and sediment, all these words here you can see up here. And so it's the study of the physical history of earth. And so looking at geology, that influenced Darwin in saying, hey, if the earth can change over time, then why wouldn't living things be able to change over time? And he also realized that it would have taken living things or organisms a long time to change, and this would only happen if the earth was very old. So he publishes, after Wallace sends him this letter and says, hey, I have this idea about evolution, Darwin is, at the threat of being scooped, he does publish all of these years of ideas in a journal called a book called The Origin of Species. All right, so it has all of his ideas about evolution, and he does give Wallace some credit because Wallace came up with his ideas, separately, all by himself, but they're the same idea as Darwin. So we alluded to this a little bit earlier. Remember, theories, the theory of evolution, they have to provide an explanation for something that's naturally happening in the world, but there has to be a lot of evidence to support it. And if different evidence comes about that is credible, then the theory is going to be tossed or changed. And so the theory of evolution, if we, boil it down to, well, what is it in a sentence? It's that all organisms on Earth have descended from a shared common ancestor, that we have an ancient ancestor that we all share. All right, here's some key vocab from our lesson for today, and have a good one.